thighs thick, thunder thighs thick, thunder thighs thick.
Thighs thick, thighs juicy, don't be jelly when my thighs shake. Ooh wee.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Food Literacy for All. Thanks for joining us this week. This is a record. We have almost 300 of you here so far. So welcome to all of you. And we're so thrilled to have Marilyn, Wann, and Chef Fresh join us this week. So a few quick announcements and then we'll get to it. So this is made possible by our growing list of co-sponsors from the University of Michigan. Thank you so much. It's crucial to have all of these groups support. There's a few things that's very special about Food Literacy for All. One of them is that this is actually a class at the University of Michigan. So there's 200 or so students enrolled in the class. And then there's also community attendees from around the country who are here in the world, perhaps, who are here with us this evening. It's also co-led by university leadership and community leadership. So from the university, myself and Dr. Margot Finn, and we're also co-led by Winona Bynum, who's the executive director of the Detroit Food Policy Council. And you'll be hearing from both of them later this evening. A few more special things about Food Literacy for All. The class is free and open to the public, and all sessions are recorded and available on the SFSI site, on the SFSI website. Jess, if you can drop the link to all the videos, that would be awesome. And ways to engage. So a few different things. One is that we have a platform called Miro that you can find the link in the chat box, and you can, if one of our speakers shares a quote that you really love, or if there's something you just want to discuss and think more about, something that was puzzling or exciting, you can put that in Miro. We're also going to have a few pop-up poll questions throughout the class. And of course, if you're a student in the class, you know that your participation grade is tied to being involved with those poll questions. If you want to engage with the world on Twitter, use the hashtag Food Literacy for All, and that'll help connect the conversations. We will have a Q&A session at the end, and you can use the Q&A feature, the Q&A box, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can. Class ends just a little bit before 8 tonight. This is the last week to remind everyone about the TFS Fellowship, which is a fellowship for underrepresented students who wish to come to grad school and study food systems. You can also find a link to that in the chat box for more information. And now let's just, we have a ton of people here tonight. So we want to hear from you. Where are you? Are you in Michigan? Are you another part of the state? Are you outside the US? And if the answer is B, C, or D, we would love to hear where you're tuning in from. Okay, 80% of you are in Southeast Michigan. 4% of you another part of Michigan. 14% of you are from another state, and 2% of you are outside the US. That is really fun to hear. And yeah, if you check in the chat box, I see it rapidly filling up. I'm not going to be able to read them all so fast, but it's really fun to see. All right. And with that, I will pass this off to my colleague, Dr. Margot Finn, to introduce our speakers. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, everyone. All right, I have the pleasure and honor of introducing our speakers tonight. Chef Fresh Roberson is beaming to us from Chicago, where they now call home. They were born and raised in Eastern North Carolina and studied cooking professionally in Thailand and the US, and have cooked in some elite kitchens, including those of Google and Facebook. However, in their own words, it is in community-based edible activism among communities of color, elders, and youth where her heart most deeply resides, including providing meals for nonprofits and programs dedicated to increasing food access for the homeless and street youth and seniors. They and we are joined today by Marilyn Wann, the fat activist whose Fat So, published in 1998, made the exuberant genius of the zine of the same name and its challenge to mainstream thinking about body size available to a broader audience, including me a decade or so later when I first started to encounter the world of fat studies in graduate school. She's also the brilliant mind and big heart behind things like the Yay scale that displays glowing adjectives like marvelous in place of a number, and the I Stand poster I showed you on the first day that sought to respond to a fat-shaming billboard ad campaign with positive portrayals of fat people, and actually people of all sizes, explaining why they stand for health at every size and respect for everybody. She gives weight diversity trainings to groups of all ages in all settings, and they are guaranteed to be, as everything she does is, this is the F word that I truly associate with her most, fun. Chef Fresh is going to kick us off, and then they and Marilyn will be in conversation for a while with each other, and there's going to be lots of time at the end for questions for all of you. Use the Q&A function for that. For students who may be trying to participate in the polls, if you have a phone that you're using and it's giving you anxiety because the polls aren't working for you, you can jot down your answers to the poll questions and email them to me or the GSIs, and you will still get credit for them. So let me quell your anxiety about that. Just jot down your answers if the Zoom thing isn't working for you. And this is truly one of the highlights of my semester, my life. I don't know. I'm beyond excited to hand things off to Chef Fresh and Marilyn Wann. And I'm going to mute myself.
Awesome, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. So thanks for inviting me. Thanks for including us. We're just gonna do a little bit of an intro, and then we're gonna have a conversation with each other here tonight. And hopefully get to a lot of your questions as well, and just, talk about ourselves. I'll talk about how I first got introduced to Marilyn, and we'll get a lot of details about us in our life. But if we can just go ahead to the next slide. The first thing I want to do is let's talk about land. I think as we talk about food and food literacy, land and being a steward of the land and being able to occupy land is a really powerful thing. Here, this quote by Mary Lyons is, when we talk about land, land is a part of who we are. It's a mixture of our blood, our past, our current, and our future. We carry our ancestors in us, and they're around us, as you all do. And so that's a land quote that I really love. And so what's really important to acknowledge this land that we occupy currently, and this land that, doesn't belong to us, but we get to, call home and steward and grow food on and just live on day to day. So if you go to the next slide, I am currently in Chicago. Chicago is where I currently call home, but I am on this call in North Carolina right now, which is where I'm originally from. And in Chicago, the land that I occupy is the land of the Council of Three Fires. That's the land that I get to steward, that I get to grow food on, that I get to serve my community on. And that is the rightful land of all of these indigenous people originally, right? And so there's this great site, I'm sure many of you have seen it before, nativeland.ca, where you can go to and see the land that you live on, you reside on, you work on, love on, play on, who's the traditional homelands that belongs to. And so if you in the chat, I know I saw a lot of different locations popping up in the chat, but feel free to shout out where you're joining us from again, so that we can share that with each other. And if you know what land, whose homeland that is, you can also throw that in the chat and take a look there. But I would love to see, we got Ann Arbor, Las Vegas. I know we got a lot of Michigan people, California. I saw earlier that some folks were in from North Carolina. Yes, thank you. So feel free to share that in the chat. We'll give folks time to do that. Okay, Detroit. Yes, Cherokee, Ann Arbor. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, and feel free to continue sharing that. As we think about whose land we're on, if you want to go to the next slide, one of the things I like to do too is, thinking about that quote, that land, that being our past, our ancestors, is I would love to acknowledge some of the ancestors who inspired me, who got me here. And as we're talking about fatness tonight and food, who are just dope folks, dope fat Black women and did a lot of amazing things in food. So Fannie Lou Hamer, folks know her as a civil rights activist. She did a lot of amazing work on food systems and cooperatives and growing food and stewarding food and you know, having a pig co-op and all the dope things that she did in addition to all of her work in the civil rights movement and voting. Georgia Gilmore is another ancestor I would love to call in tonight as we go along with our conversation. Georgia Gilmore was a chef. She fed the civil rights movement and funded it a lot through her food and cooking. People think a lot about her and her Pies from Nowhere campaign, that, you know, that Club from Nowhere got to cook and bake pies and sell also as a means to fund the civil rights movement, and having folks in her home, in her living room that, you know, we all recognize, and feeding them, as I think about the work that I do, energizing them, giving them the nourishment that they need to do this activism work. And in the middle here, this is Mary McNair. This is my grandmom. My grandmother was a sharecropper. That's me that she's holding on the beach of Eastern North Carolina. She grew food, she sold clothes, she canned, jarred, did everything, took care of my family, and raised 12 children who all grew up on the farm, itching and begging to get off, whether they can get married, get jobs, to move off the land. And now I'm doing everything I can to get back to the land. So these are some ancestors as we have this conversation tonight that I would like to call for. And if you have some folks in your life you want to bring to this conversation tonight, who are not here, who got you to this space today, please drop their names in the chat. Any of your ancestors and people you would love to call for. All right. All right, I see them coming in. So Sharon Block and Angela Davis and Jane Nagaki. Yes, grandmothers and great grandmothers. Yes, thank you. So continue, please. Leah Penniman. Yes, please continue. Folks who, you know, could still be here or who are now in the ancestor realm, feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll keep those moving. Thanks, everyone. Okay. All right. I love it. This is beautiful. All right. So I'm gonna introduce myself very briefly. I think as we have this conversation today and tonight, we're gonna learn more about me, and there's always space to answer, ask questions if there's anything that I leave out that you would like to know about me. But some of the key, this is like the solid, important information that I feel is important to know about me. The first one is that you want to put me in your first round pick for the zombie apocalypse. And you got to trust me on this. So I sometimes say zombie apocalypse, or people say when shit hits the fan. I often will say AKA when white folks start acting a fool. You want me on your team. So not only am I growing food, I can feed you and cook food. We can, you know, be out on the land. I can build things. I am a peaceful person, but I know how to use a weapon. You know, all of the things, is all these reasons why you want me on your team when shit hits the fan. So that's what I love to let people know. That's an important information to know about me. The other thing is my love language is acts of service. And so that feels important to me because one of the things that I say is that I'm in love with my community. And so you'll see the way I work and how I do is probably always going to be in service of my community and my people and that work. So I'm a farmer, I'm a chef, and I do a lot of things in the world around food and food systems and access and pleasure and community well-being, and all of that is an acts of service to my community. So there's lots of other things, you know, there's a bio and all those things, but these are two things that feel very important to know that are a testament to my values and what I care about around self-sufficiency, sustainability, and taking care of my people, and my strive for collective freedom. So there's a few handles there so that you can like follow and keep in touch with me. I will warn you in advance. I am a work in progress around social media. I am trying, but occasionally I post like once a month if I'm good, but I am working on posting more. So feel free to follow me and keep in touch. And you can go to the next slide. All right, but I am so excited that to get a message from Marilyn to ask to be in this conversation together, because I got the chance to meet Marilyn Wann back in 2004. I was still in undergrad, and I had found in this magazine a little blurb about a conference called No Lose. And I was in Evanston, Illinois, so it's just north of Chicago. And this conference was going to be in New Jersey, like in this small town outside of kind of near Philly in New Jersey. So, and it was called No Lose. And so No Lose back then stood for like the National Organization of Lesbians of Size. And now it's not an acronym for anything. It's a much more inclusive space for all gender identities, all folks, all orientations. It was a big fat conference. And one of the things I was dealing with at that point when I saw this ad, and it was in Girlfriends magazine, was I had grew up really heavily in diet culture. You know, ever since I was little, I remember my mom being on diets, my sister being on diets. I was on diets growing up, and you know, it was something that was just always around and always present. It's like this continuous space of not being okay in your body, always trying to change it, always trying to shrink it. And you know, I grew up very athletic, so I would be playing sports, I would go to the doctors for my yearly physicals, and all they would say was, oh, you should lose some weight. And I'm like, I'm not here for that. I'm here for my physical so that I can play soccer or whatever it was. And that was a big piece of all they could say. And so that carried with me. So throughout junior high, throughout high school, and here I was in college, still that taking up so much space. And I went to this conference and got introduced to a world that was completely different of that, right? And so, and one of the first people I met at this conference was a person named Yalith, and she told me about this book, Fatso. And I was like, what is this book? So I'm like looking through it and reading it and amazed. And I'm at this conference with the author, leading workshops and all of those things. And so that it was my introduction to Fatso and Marilyn Wann. And I'm so excited to have you here tonight and be in this conversation with you. Feel free, you can take this slide off. We're gonna just chat for a bit. And that conference for me, I often say, really changed my life and my perspective on how much space like shrinking my body needed to take up, and that it didn't have to take up any space at all, which was like nothing that I had ever like before then thought was possible.
Imagine.
And just got introduced into this world where that was a reality, and immediately it was like a switch turned on for me. And so welcome. I don't know if there's anything you want to say or introduce or say about yourself.
Just thank you. That was the most perfect and wonderful beginning to talking about fat liberation, to talking about how we met, which was an amazing event. And I think I did a body painting workshop that time. So we met doing this really freeing, unusual activity together. That was pretty great. And just thank you to U of M and to the people who create this program for making it possible for me to do this today. It just feels really good. And your introduction reminds me of me growing up. I didn't have these concepts. I didn't even have the notion that you could be an unapologetic or happy fat person as you are growing up. I didn't engage in diet culture very much because I thought, well, people are treating me so horribly. I'm just, it's not that they're treating me so horribly, they did sometimes, but that I'm such an outsider because of my weight that nothing I could possibly do could ever turn me into an insider, you know? So I just didn't really go there, which I think was saved me from a lot of self conveyed fat oppression, right? So but then I found some of the early fat activists' work in my mid-20s and came out as a fat person and started using the F word fat, thanks to other people who had that amazing revolutionary thought we could just be fat and exist. And so then I started the zine Fatso because I was denied health insurance based on my weight alone. I was 26, I was, you know, I'm lucky to have good health, but you shouldn't have to have good health in order to access healthcare. And I just decided that I wasn't willing to be excluded based on my weight from any of the things in life. And I started doing the things that I needed. So the problem with that is that I happen to be a white person, happen to have a lot of privileges in life. And so a lot of what I created came from what I needed from that worldview or that experience. And it wasn't as inclusive or based in other people's experiences. But I have to hope that somewhere in the Fatso book, there's some stuff that I wrote a book that I would have liked to have when I was like 16. And it's really good bathroom reading. There's like little short chapters and you can flip the pages and there's a fat person who kind of dances around in the corner of the book and all this stuff. So I did the thing that I wanted, which was not just about my anger. I certainly have it, but I wanted things to be fun and freeing too. So I hope that when you got confronted with this Fatso book at a conference, there was something in there that let you feel fabulous and at home in your body.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it definitely was that paired with the conference, you know, being able to be in a space where I met all these elders who, you know, we were at pool parties and, you know, these stories around like elders who were crying at these pool parties, like, you know, hadn't not been in a swimsuit since they were 11, or, you know, who would tell me these stories. And like, you know, having this beautiful work of this book and, you know, this conference and everything, it was almost instant to just have this acknowledgement of, you know, this community. And one of the things I don't think I've ever told you this, but one of the things that I did is there are these hat shops, I think they're still around, called Lids. Mm-hmm. And so I went to a Lids and I bought like this toboggan, this hat, and I had them put on the front fat, just the same way as your book, fat exclamation point, so with the question mark. And I would wear that everywhere, like after that. And people would be like, what? And so it was just like something in reclaiming that word and being unapologetic and being fat that like spoke to me almost instantly, right? And freed up so much space in my life, you know? And so one of the things that I think about in that and having that freedom is like how much space diet industry and diet culture and like all of that took up in my life before that. And thinking about in my family's life, right? In my mom's life, in my sister. I grew up with my sister who would like wrap herself in plastic wrap and wrap her thighs in plastic wrap and then put clothes on top of it. You know, she was, you know, always on diets. She ended up being one of those folks who took fen and all of these diet, you know, these things. And I think we have a poll question too around like just this weight loss industry and how much money it takes up, right?
We do that poll right now?
Yeah.
It's the question about the dollars. Yes, great. So
I think about that a lot, like not only how much mental space and how much energy for me was freed, letting go of that, you know, but also thinking about how much money we spend all the time as a nation, as you know, on weight loss, right? And on this concept.
And it connects, right? So I think one of the ways that I think of fat oppression is as a weight hierarchy. So it's not just fat is bad and thin is good. It's not just a binary of two sides. It's like an endless ladder, and every little rung on the ladder is like a pound that you weigh, or a clothing size, or you know, who thought you looked thin or fat that day. And we all know, because we're told constantly, where we are on that ladder, and it's really uncomfortable to be below people and feel less than. It's precarious to have unearned privilege and be more than other people and have to base your opinion of yourself on that. And so we're all living in relation to this weight hierarchy. And supposedly the way to get comfortable with that fact is to make your body conform to some kind of weight thing, like to be thin. And I think when you mentioned your mom and your sisters and the generations, it's happened in my family too, it happens. Trying to be a smaller body, to weigh less, can also participate in trying to be like more mainstream, like whiter or more heterosexual. Like it, all of these oppressions that people are dealing with connect to feeling not okay, not welcome because you're fat. And then if you're less fat, maybe that helps. You know, it's like they all reinforce each other. It's pretty profound. So, but we've been using the word fat. Can I do my thing about the word fat, and then we'll get the answers to the polls?
Yeah.
So what are the other words we use? People in chat can say, like, what are the other words we use instead of saying a fat person? What do you say? Other words we use. Yeah, we use an O word, chubby, big, perfect. You guys are on it. Yeah. So keep saying whatever words you want to say. Those are all really great. I'm just going to break down the messages that I think those words carry, whether we mean these messages or not. So the O words, overweight. I'm going to ask people in chat, does overweight sound like a judgment? Yes or no? Yeah. Do we say over height? No, not so much. So there's a judgment there. Thinner is better, that weight hierarchy. Obese, does that sound like a diagnosis, like something medical? Yeah. Can you tell if someone's healthy just by weighing them? For sure. Yeah. So not only is that medical assumption or that judgment something I disagree with, but it does harm. It means that people don't get the medical care they need or the respect that they need in seeking medical care. And then the other words, as fun as they may sound, are kind of euphemisms. And we only use a euphemism when we think we have to cover up something negative. And so the option is to use the word fat as if it's just a word, like fat and thin, you know, young and old, you know, short and tall, and destigmatize that. So I invite you guys to use the word fat in a way that doesn't participate in judgment and medicalizing and feeling like certain people don't get to exist. So what did we get on our poll? People are knowledgeable. Yeah. So can we say the right answers? I think so.
Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. So indeed, last year, Americans, people in the United States, spent $78 billion on weight loss products. That may have been from 2019, and then the number went down a little bit during the pandemic, but it's headed back up. When I first started being a fat activist, people in the United States were spending $30 billion on the weight loss industry. So the weight loss industry has only grown in the last 25, 30 years, which you would think if its product worked to cause people to lose weight permanently, then they would go out of business, right? So we know that weight loss products don't actually produce lasting weight loss. And we keep spending money on that. With that money, billions of dollars, we could feed every hungry and food insecure person in the United States for that same year. So we're investing in something that we care about, and we could, I think we could care about different things. Like, so when you say Chef Fresh, did you want to talk about like freeing up the space or the energy or just all of that? Yeah. So let me think. So we know that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking about that sitting in that statement you said around we could be feeding everyone for the amount of money we do to attempt to change our bodies and shrink ourselves and
Starve
do all of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think about like, yo, what would it look like? Someone asked a question. I saw something pop up around self-care and how to nourish and how do we, take care of our well-being. And I think about like, what would it really look like if even a fraction of that money we could put into what would it really be like nourishing ourselves or taking care of our well-being or even and I think people do things like movement based things sometimes in order to shrink or change their bodies. But what it like I think about the joy I find in movement, and I've always played
Dancing.
sports and like
Yeah.
all of these things. And what does it look like if I could invest a fraction of that money and just taking care of ourselves and nourishing ourselves and all of that.
So the cost of fat oppression, the cost of investing in where we are on the weight hierarchy is actually not just dollars. It's, as someone just said, the personal cost, the impact on our health, because living with that internalized stigma really hurts us. I wanted to say just my big goal whenever I get a chance to talk like this, my big goal is that number one, I want each one of us to feel at home in our own bodies as we are now. And I know that's not something I always feel, but it's what I want for each one of us. And the other part of it is that I want each one of us to be fully welcome in society as we are, the weight we are, and everything else about us. And if those things aren't true, if fat people are not welcome to feel at home in our own bodies or welcome in society, then there's really no point in talking about what we're eating or what our health is or anything, because we've already said we don't get to exist. So human rights and justice come first. And then it becomes really obvious that there is just no way to wish that an entire demographic group didn't exist for our own good. You can call it eugenics, you can call it just deeply misguided, but there's a way that we can reclaim all of this stuff from the weight hierarchy. And I hope that we can kind of try to figure that out a little bit, Chef, while we're chatting,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love this space of feeling at home in our body. It reminds me in general, a lot of this work that I do, and a lot of things I think about how I navigate is around access, right? And so whether that's, I think about creating spaces that feel accessible to like nourish yourself, to take care of your well-being, to feel like you have a space to exist and be just how you are in whatever body you are. And so whether that is like whatever size body you are, whatever gender body you are, like whatever that looks like, right? Having this space to exist and be and take up space. And a big portion of that for me is having choice, right? And so having like this space of a real choice, not like you got these 5 things, choose. Like you have this abundance, right? Choose, right? And so I think about that a lot as I think about, food, right? And food and like that access I even like chairs, right? Like, going into places and having to sit in a chair that is comfortable, that works with my body, that feels good. And one of the things that I think about, like this just that purpose that you kind of put out there that you have of this space of feeling at home in your body and thinking about like when you talk about like the use of fat versus other words and the judgment and the different pieces that come along with that is going back to that experience at No Lose and like going to those conferences over the years, and this space that kind of got created there that before I started seeing like for real inclusion, happen in space, before I saw people trying to like make space for it, before, like, we got the transcript and the captions going across the bottom of the screen. We got, all of those things, like No Lose and those conferences year after year were the first places that I saw like so much intentional work being put on access and like choice and making a space where people felt at home, right? And so like that looked like always having a sign language interpreter, right? I saw there was so much intentionality around making the space safe for sense.
Right, and for sitting down, but also the food choices that were available.
Yeah.
Like, stuff that gets coded as good or bad, just here, you get everything that you might feel like in a moment.
Exactly. When I started going to No Lose, I was vegan. And there was an abundance of vegan choices for me. There was an abundance of choices for the meat eaters. There was like all these things for people who had dietary restrictions or allergies. They used to have these rooms that were kind of like, it remind me when you think about people who are on like movie sets and they have green rooms, that there's like a spread of snacks. They would have these kind of lounges where you could go into, and the makeup of food in that space was so accessible. Like I could go in, there was carrots and hummus and chips and Oreos and M&Ms, and there was just a plethora of food options for wherever you were, and whatever you needed. You needed a salad, it was there. You needed some potato chips, it was there. And it was just unapologetically there, and there was just so much access and space, right? And so I think about like that way of food, right? This way of like, what does it look like when my community has all the different types of food I need, and I have access to a real choice where there's everything, right? And I can have what I need if I'm vegan. I can have what I need if I need some bacon. I can have what I need if I want mom and pop spot or a fry joint, or a grocery store or a farmer's market or a garden, right? And so I think about that that too, because it was just such a great space for access, and it really impacted the way I do work. And I think about like even folks who had fragrance sensitivities, right? They did a lot of work in advance on how people could come to the conference. They had products for you to use if you didn't have unscented things. Like there was just so much space to meet people where they were and to not make them feel like a burden, right? To not make them feel like other if they had needs, access needs, right?
What if we lived in harmony with appetite and also with satiety or fullness or satisfaction, right? Like, what if we thought of those experiences as a form of knowledge and authority in our lives, that we don't need someone to tell us what to eat or how little to eat or how much to eat, or whether we feel like moving or dancing or swimming or gardening, or sitting on a couch reading a book, that we give that authority to our own embodiment, and then we claim that in opposition to all these forces, because the social pressure around the weight hierarchy is intense. And so it takes a little bit of getting mad and being willing to break with the mainstream reality and make your own reality kind of little bubbles of safe space, like that green room. I love that image, or your garden, right? Where people can come and have a place to sit and have a place to contribute, have a place to be nourished. So in Fat Community, there's a notion called health at every size, which is a great term. You can search online and find a lot of resources about that. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be perfectly healthy, because that's not reality. But it does mean that we can support ourselves in ways that are evidence-based and just and non-harmful. So we're not reinforcing fat oppression, we're not reinforcing racism, we're not reinforcing sexism and homophobia and ableism when we're doing stuff that we call health enhancing. Yeah. And so health at every size is a really important just kind of term that I want people to know about if they didn't already, and I'm sure a lot of people do. And the other stuff around reclaiming how we relate to food and eating, or reclaiming how we relate to physical activity. And there's a whole world about intuitive eating, which I won't get into. Healing from eating disorders is so important, and especially important for people who face like a lot of oppressions and don't fit that kind of thin white girl image of like an anorexic person. But setting that aside, I tend to think of the mainstream approach as a kind of punishment principle. Like you have a body, how wrong of you to have a body, and so you need punishment. And the punishment is like being hungry or over exercising, forcing yourself to do these things. And then you need motivation to do those behaviors because they're not fun, they're punishment, right? Who wants to be punished? And then the result is that you're supposed to have a better position on the weight hierarchy. And then that's supposed to bring you good things. Well, what if we just went for the good things themselves and left the weight hierarchy out of it, left the poison pill out of it, left the completely unnecessary prerequisite out of it. And we just went for a pleasure principle. So that would mean hunger and fullness are your guides. Your own body is your guide. You can reclaim whatever food and whatever physical activity for joy, not for punishment, for being in the body you have now, not being in some body that's imaginary and in the future and not really you. So I wonder if that's stuff that you've come across with people that you work with in feeding people and in growing food and in relating to the soil, you know, that that there's a reality in our bodies and in our world that we can try to trust.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think what is, sorry, I have a light that goes off every now and then. I think that those things are definitely, you know, relatable. There's so much importance in pleasure and finding joy and things. And I think about that, especially around, you know, food and having that access to food and having that access to outdoor space and having that access to movement and what does it look like? I saw people in the comments post around, you know, doctors' experiences and visits and navigating the healthcare system and, you know, all of these things. And one of the things that feels really important to me, I'm a board chair of a community health center. And, you know, we serve over, I think, 40,000 patients. And, you know, a lot of them are LGBTQ folks. And what feels really important to me in those spaces is making sure, you mentioned health at every size, or HAES, and making sure that those spaces are free of body shaming and people are getting those kind of tools to carry with them and that they can navigate those spaces. Because, you know, I think when people want to care for their well-being in a certain way, or in a certain way where, you know, they can make sure that they're taking care of themselves and their body in the ways that they need to, that often becomes a barrier. Like I mentioned, like even I just love playing sports when I was young, you know, like I just love like being a part of the athletics and going in for physical every year to be able to try out for the teams was exhausting, because all they told me every time I came in was that I was too fat. You know, I ran every day, I played every day, I had joy every day, I would roller skate and do these things. And then you have to go to a doctor's visit where they're just going to tell you that you're too fat, you need to do these things to your body, right?
I knew someone who was on the swim team in high school and stopped swimming when the team uniform didn't come in their size.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
Now, how really counterproductive is that? I mean, and it shows us that the anti-fat worldview is not it's not designed to produce health. It's designed to produce a conformist system of hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
one of the other things you said, I have my water bottle here. Let me see if it'll show up. I don't know if it'll show up. I'm going to try to take my background off to see if it'll show up. But I have this water bottle and I have this sticker on it that I love. Like that way. And it goes, I work out because I love my body, not because I hate it.
Right.
And I think about that a lot because I just took a couple of weeks off and I went to this like fitness camp. And it's like a really tough place, right? Like I am a fat person who unapologetically is fat. You know, I have an eating disorder. I navigate this space in a lot of different ways, and I'm going to this place because there's things there that I want, right? That I need. There's a movement that I want access to. There's this type of space that, like, yes, I want to get away for a week and get massages and go to yoga classes and be able to do like all these like athletic things. But you know, the space is also filled with folks who like are really like, I need to change my body, you know, like all these things, these other things there that are coming from this space of, you know, not love and not care, not pleasure, right? And I think that I'm hoping, like I always hope for folks that they can find that pleasure along the way and get what they need out of that too. But it's so hard when the norm is to navigate these spaces out of this other place. And I think about that a lot. You know, as I do my work in general, right? As like as in a fat body, and I refer to myself oftentimes as supersized, right? Like you know, you know, there's all different size fat folks, right? Mid-size, very small body fat, supersized, you know, and I refer to myself as like a supersized fat person who is in this work of food and growing food, a farmer who's in this work of like cooking food, especially navigating cooking like really accessible food, so people who have all types of dietary restrictions can like find pleasure and joy and deliciousness and in this food, right? And so I think about those things a lot, of like how I'm doing this work in my body as an act of resistance, as a you know, maybe even an act of activism, unapologetically, right? And so, you know, there's all, you know, I come across people in the space a lot who are, you know, like, it's okay because I'm trying to change my body. It's okay because I'm trying to shrink my body. It's okay, you know, versus it's just okay, you know? And so
Yeah. I also
yeah.
want to say that it is not often that I'm able to speak in a food justice setting about fat liberation. And I'm so excited about this course this year. Just all the people that I want to learn from, and I'm proud to be here and be here with you. So I think already this course is revolutionary, and everyone who's making it happen and everyone who's participating is doing something really cutting edge that the world doesn't have very much of, you know, and we can reclaim food justice from its counterproductive possible impact of reinforcing weight hierarchy. You know, I think we have a poll question about the weight loss, whether people lose weight. And I'm wondering if we can do that one now. Because when I think about it, like this urge to move like lower weight or whatever and conform to weight hierarchy is really profound. And it goes against what we know. It goes against the fact that we have 50 or 60 years of data showing, you know, that people don't maintain weight loss very well. And so why would we go against facts, right? Why would we go against that? We know that people come in different sizes and we're not likely to all turn into thin people and have no more fat people. I think it's because we're just under a ton of pressure, right? So the question I wanted to ask is like, how much failure are we willing to put up with? You know, how much, what kind of failure rate are we willing to put up with to believe in this fantasy that everyone can just be thin if we just try hard enough? So I think people are able to take this particular little survey question, which I drew from an actual piece of research. So this is based on data. So we can give people a little time. You know,
Did it pop up yet?
I've been seeing it for a little while. I hope people are
Okay.
finding it. I mean, you know, how many times does each individual person have to go around that same mulberry bush of thinking that some different method of trying to lose weight will produce lasting, sustainable weight loss, right? In individual lives, and then over our population. When I was first doing the zine, I came up with a statistic that there were enough people on an intentional weight loss diet at any given time to populate like 26 states or something like that. So we've tried this experiment over and over and over for decades. Millions of us, we've tried this experiment. Let's, the experiment is turn fat people into thin people, and we know the results, right? So do we have any final votes? Cool. You see it, Fresh?
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, I love this. People have got it. So I think the chance that someone might lose like 5% of their body weight is 1 in 8 over the course of a year. So this is only for a year. The chance that I'd have to look back at the research, but there's something that's like 1 in 210 in that research, but which is like I think more average weight people losing like a certain amount. But for a fat man, for someone who's like on the fatter end of the weight spectrum, to achieve so-called normal weight, the chances of that are 1 in 1,290. So when we have content on like TV that shows these fattest people making this huge long-term effort to turn themselves into so-called normal weight or thin people, that's just really not something that is going to be sustainable or health enhancing for the vast majority of people, or really for anybody. It's like an outlier. So we have to ask ourselves, how much failure are we willing to tolerate if we're like going for these 1 in 1,500 chances at best, instead of saying, you know what, maybe this whole weight hierarchy thing is not all good. Maybe it has some downsides, and maybe we don't have to do it in part because it's bad for our health, for mental and physical health, but also it's bad for social justice.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm always thinking about like the other side of things, from like just, I like to vision and be in the space of like, the what ifs. And so I'm often thinking about like, what if people just got to like, live the life that they want to live right now? Like, what if, people didn't like, because, I often, I support body autonomy and people to be able to do what it is that they want to do if they, and also sometimes I wonder what that's rooted in and driven by. And a lot of times I feel like there's a lot of push and stuff coming from media and that and how much that impacts folks. But I also had a friend who recently was just telling me about how much she missed dancing. And like how much she missed dancing and how she couldn't dance now because her body had gotten bigger. And I was like, girl, if you don't go and dance,
right,
like you can dance right now. And so, and she was like, well, it's harder to dance now because of, X, Y, and Z, and I'm heavier. And I was like, well, then if you start moving now, it becomes easier. And like, what if you move now and you're moving like this much, and the next week you're moving more, And so I just wonder how.
And also we can dance from our chairs, we can dance with any part of us, what we've learned from disability activists for 60 years, right? So, or 40 years, whenever the VA passed. So, it just feels because as long as we're investing in a weight hierarchy, we're investing in that thing that says you can't do it unless you look a certain way. And certainly there's a lot of systemic structural stuff that gets in our ways, but the vision that you have, I'm with you. Like, what if we stopped getting in our own way, as much as we can reflect on that and undo it, divest from it, find ways to embody our joy and our appetite and our experience right now.
And I think about it a lot because I know people's stuff that shows up around fat is often cloaked in this like, oh, I'm just concerned for your health, right? And it's often like framed in this way. And so I think about that a lot because one of the things that I feel like over the years and having this community you know, really had me look at, because, you know, I was, when I was growing up and doing all of this, I was always like a good fatty, right? Like I was athletic and I played sports, and like, you know, I was vegan, or I did this and I was a good, like I didn't have any health concerns, right? And so I was a good fatty. And so, you know, I think about this stuff as I've learned so much over the years around, like, one, health not being a moral imperative, right? So like there's no morality around like I have to be healthy or I can't have any of that. But then also, besides that, when people are concerned for my health, I just think about that, like how much better it is for my well-being to like go and feel free, right? And have that freedom, and like wear my swimsuit on the beach, and go to my dance class, and go spend 2 weeks at a fitness spa because I love moving my body and it makes me feel good, and it helps my anxiety, and it helps my, you know, or whatever it is. I just like move, you know. And I just think about like how much better, how much healthier it is that to normalize, you know, being able to, we might refer to it as haze, and adopting those principles, or like whatever it is, but to just have that freedom from not getting caught up in like trying to not be fat, right? Or trying
Yeah.
to not, you know, like what if it just, I just get to live, you
Well,
know?
and when we use weight to define health, that becomes really creepy really quickly, but it's really typical. It's usual in our society for mainstream people and for medical people to use weight as if it's just like defines 100% someone's health. And that insistence means that we miss out on a lot of stuff, that we're denying things to fat people. We're pushing expectations on thin people. I mean, there are thin people who go undiagnosed with certain health conditions because they're not seen as having them, right? Like if a fat person goes into the doctor every time, they want to check your blood sugar, right? And only 1 in 8 fat people are ever going to be diabetic. 7 out of 8 fat people are never going to be diabetic. But every time a doctor sees a fat person, they think, oh, you must be diabetic. That removes the compassion and the real support for living well for people who do have diabetes across the weight spectrum.
Yep.
We're not invulnerable. People are going to have health concerns. And we need to also be willing to acknowledge the health impact, the negative, the harms that come from social injustice and from false scarcity that we've created in our society, you know, all the ways that people aren't supported well. And tease those apart, including weight stigma. Like living with weight stigma is tough on your body. It's tough on your spirit, you know, it's tough on your psyche. And if someone really cares about my health, they're not going to talk about my weight to me, including my doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a challenge. I'll say it's hard, but it's also just a challenge, a repeated process of finding where that boundary is for me. And other people can find it in ways, you know, I'm not always a perfect warrior for myself every day, but yep. I try not to be like a push me, pull you beast that's going in 2 directions at once, like, you know, but it takes a really long time to see weight hierarchy as toxic and undesirable, because we're so coded to think, ooh, look at that ought to be good, you know, that diet ought to be fun, you know, to be sucked into it. We all have the weight hierarchy embedded in us from early days in our lives, and it's not going to just go away. It's always kind of going to be there, but we can live differently in relation to it and have different expectations of people around us and systems. And when you were talking about exercise, I was thinking about how important representation is, that we see all different kinds of bodies and all different kinds of people doing food justice and doing physical activity and doing dance and doing cultural creation, you know, that we need the fattest of us, the most disabled of us, the poorest, the most queer, the most gender diverse. We need the people who have been pushed to the edges to be our examples for each other, so that we can all live at home in our bodies. and
Yes.
especially for the people who need to be seen as themselves, you know?
Yes, I love it. So we're gonna move to question and answer part, but I did want to just
Oh, wait.
mention when you brought that up
Yeah.
is that I was there's a couple things. One, that reminded me, you know, I had a friend once that I went to undergrad with who told me that she needed to lose weight because she wanted to be a doctor and no one was gonna respect what she said as a fat doctor, right? And I just heard, I was at this fitness place the other week, and there was one person who was just like, she went to another place and one of the teachers had gained weight, and so she was just like, no one wants to come there anymore because you don't want a trainer who's fat, right? And so
That's the trainer I want.
what's that? Yeah,
That's the trainer I want
too, right? But so that reminded me of that because, you know, I do this work in this way. You know, like we feed folks, we grow food, we're cooking, you know, like all of these things in this fat body, or like even when I'm, you know, teaching classes or any of this stuff, and I think about that, right? What is it like to be, you know, like this fat person doing this work and people seeing that and seeing that difference and like this
and
shift and that, and then
you are the ancestor for how many everybody else who gets to see you and be near you, right?
Yeah.
And for all of their generations. There's one more poll question that I think may fit in a little bit about where is there a law? Let's see if people
oh yeah, and this one is funny because it reminds me, as people are taking that, it reminds me of this job I went and interviewed for. I had a great resume, you know, all this experience, and like I sent it in, and she called me in, and you know, it's a chef job, and it was in the kitchen. Her kitchen was very small, and so, you know, I think when she saw me and saw my body, that immediately was like, she, you know, a different thing for her. But then I think she forgot, and so I think she was looking through the resumes again, and she called me again. And I was like, oh no, you don't remember? I already came once, you know? And so I didn't get that job. But but the other thing I was thinking
get
of,
you. Like you could have been in her little tiny ass kitchen doing something amazing, and maybe just move a counter a half a foot over and do something even more amazing.
Yeah. But the other thing I was going to say as we go into these question and answers is when you were saying that, like that representation of different bodies, right? Doing this and in movement, is like, I love now social media. It's so easy to find community, right? And so I just picked up this issue of the Runners magazine because Martinez is on the cover doing his thing. I'm a member of the Slow AF Run Club, and he's done so his I think his Instagram handle is something like 300 pounds and running, and he is the bomb, right? Like he talks about all of this work, and you know, all the time. And so, you know, and unapologetic, not for weight loss, from any of those perspectives, and I love him, and he just got the cover of Runners.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
And there are so many people doing amazing work. I think of Jessamine Stanley, who's teaching yoga. I'm going to mention a couple names, and then I'm going to forget 500 others. And then there's all the people I don't even happen to know, because there's so many people doing body reclamation, kind of embodiment justice work through physical activity or through dance or through theater or through food and agriculture, and how we relate to the land and growing what we need to survive, and how we relate to our whole planet and how we're doing that. And so we can start to find our own representation, or we can be the representation that we need.
Yes.
So how's the poll?
All right. Well, now I know we keep talking, so go ahead and start these questions.
We need longer, right? Because I'm enjoying the conversation. But we have some amazing questions that I think will, you know, just further the conversation. There's a couple of questions around terminology.
Should we just say what the answer was, or do people
know?
There are height, weight, anti-discrimination laws in a handful of cities and in Michigan. So if you encounter weight discrimination at the doctor's office or in a fitness club or sitting in a theater seat that's too small because of the arms, you have a law that you can use to let people know that they should be doing better in the state of Michigan. And that's really heroic and wonderful. So
That is amazing to know. Thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah.
A couple of questions around terminology. What should people who have thin privilege, should they use the word fat? And what is considered to be acceptable terminology when in body liberation work?
Do you have any thoughts, Fresh?
I think like with anything, a lot of stuff is going to be personal, because I did see someone in the comments even mention that they think it's fine for them to use it. They don't like when others use it. I want everyone to use fat, but that is my perspective. One thing I would say, as you alluded to, Marilyn, when I know that you avoided ever saying the other O word, people should kind of get that word out of their vocabulary.
Don't need them. Don't need them. No O words.
That word you don't need. And I know that people use it in a medical context a lot. It's often now in the movement work considered often a slur. Like people don't use that word as much. But I think it's going to be back and forth with the use of fat. I use fat. I know most of the communities that I navigate use fat by thin privileged folks, and all folks use fat in the same way that folks use Black, in the same way folks use other.
One caution that I think I would say is that I don't go around deciding what somebody's body is. I don't go around saying, well, you're fat, so yeah, I'll assume you think a certain way. Right. I want to create a space where we can all self-identify as our bodies, right? And I understand that a lot of people are still hurting from being called fat. So I have to hope that when we use the word as a simple, non-judgmental word, and also as a political act of reclamation, that we could create space for everybody to be in their own body. But it's a really important question. I think people of all sizes have an investment, a direct personal investment in the experience you've had around weight pressures and the weight hierarchy, and show up for fat people, but also show up for yourself.
I love that. I loved when you said defining health is creepy. I also think it's lazy. I think it's very lazy, and just like most biases, it doesn't serve anybody well. Not the people supposedly privileged or the people who are the target of it. It just doesn't serve anyone well. Got a couple of questions about health. People wanted you to talk about BMI, and when you think about health, how do you define it?
I'm gonna start this one, Marilyn, and I'm gonna pass it to you, because I'm sure you have a lot of things about the racist BMI stuff. But one of the things is, just like you were just saying around talking about health is creepy. Health is such a overutilized, meaningless word for me. And I think about it a lot because people often use it when they refer to my food. And I'm just like, and I have feelings about it because it's so objective, right? And I do a lot of cooking for people with all types of dietary restrictions. So yeah, whole wheat can be healthy until you can't have wheat, and then don't eat whole wheat because that's not healthy for you, right? Or I have people who, you're not gonna eat, quinoa if you have diverticulitis, right? So it's just so meaningless sometimes, it feels like. And one of the things I often share when I think about my health and when I'm checking in around me and myself, my well-being, my partner and I do it with some friends, do a check-in called PIES. And we think about all these different segments of our well-being, right? And so I spell it PIES with some extra S's on the end, right? And so we check in around our physical well-being, how are we doing physically, and checking around that. We check in around our intellectual well-being for the I, our emotional well-being, and then the S's is gonna feel like where you want to check in. Do you want to check in around your spiritual, your sexual, or your social well-being, or all of them, right? And so for me, that is my constant check-in around my health, right? And my well-being. Because
a book about that, write a book about that.
I picked it up from someone else who gave me that check-in. Okay, well, so a therapist or someone gave me that check-in. Right. So I don't know where it comes from, but we love it and we alter it and we make it work for us. But that's what I think about is my health, because it just seems like such a meaningless term, right? And so different for so many people, especially when I think about it in relation to food or in relation to like one aspect of my well-being instead of the whole thing. But
exactly.
please talk about BMI and
BMI.
races.
So BMI, I wrote it in the typing, but it's I think of it as badly misused information. So it definitely comes from eugenics, it comes from white supremacy and classism, ableism. It's not an innocent term. It's not a particularly scientific term, and it's definitely never been based. No, there's no data to apply it to individuals. It was created by some guy to track populations.
Yeah.
So we have this urge to use weight to define health, and it's like we're backwards engineering to try to find the justification for that in some kind of data, and it doesn't exist. And so BMI is the latest iteration. Before, there were the height weight, ideal height weight charts from MetLife, which were invented by a guy named Louis Dublin, who had a fat wife, and he didn't like that she had gained weight over the course of their marriage. And so he took data from life insurance policyholders in the 20s, who, by the way, were probably well-resourced, financially resourced white men, right? And he used that data to apply to the whole population in the same way. So none of this stuff is, none of this stuff would hold up if we were behaving like scientists, or if our scientists were behaving like scientists. So, you know, the white lab coat has been used to justify all kinds of prejudice historically, and the way that we're using weight to define who counts as a person or what kind of life is worth even living is all steeped in that history of racism and bunch of. Why are we still doing it? Because we feel social pressure, and we want to ease that discomfort of worrying about being judged and excluded. And so the way to ease that discomfort of worrying about being judged and excluded is to go and question the prejudice, not to change our bodies, not to feel like we have to conform to that judgment. And unfortunately, our medical system really has bought in to this big old lie, right? And is imposing it on us. I mean, I hear from people all the time, like, I need a knee replacement. You know, human beings need knee replacements. Knees are a very weird design. Thank goodness we know how to replace them in a way that kind of works mostly, right? So, but the fat people who go in needing knee replacements get told, no, you can't have one unless you aren't fat. Well, that's just saying you don't get to exist. Like, you don't get to talk about my health if you think I don't deserve to exist, right? And it's heartbreaking when we have to consult people who don't want us to exist and try to get medical services from them. So that's heartbreaking. So there are workarounds and tricks and arguments that people in fat community have developed. And this notion that, well, the doctor said so, so it must be true, is especially problematic. And, you know, we deserve to have some skepticism about that, just like we have skepticism about a lot of things in our world. And I think we would have a lot more of that skepticism if there weren't this incredible social pressure to just don't even question it. This is just, you have to buy in. So I want to get to a lot more questions and comments, so I'll share.
Okay, I'm gonna try to squeeze one more in. We're almost at the end. And this is just so great, because this is part of dispelling this, is discussing it and challenging people to even see it and think about it and not just accept it. A graduate student asked, how do they push back on using obesity in research? And a nutrition student asked that as well. I mean, and I face that a lot. I told you, as my training as a dietitian, I'm glad that more and more nutrition professionals are questioning that, because it's right that I will not talk about weight loss. I only want to talk about what's best for you and your overall, you know, what are your goals? What do you want to do? What's your, you know, specifically, and not I don't care about your size. I
That's
just,
so amazing. Like if anybody told me that 25, 28 years ago when I started out, this would be happening, you'd be saying these words, wouldn't have believed it. I think there are gatherings of professional people doing this kind of work, or academic people doing this kind of work, where these questions come up, and you don't have to use obesity as if it's meaningful. In fat studies, people have a typical kind of paragraph at the beginning of each paper that they publish saying, you know, this O word is a word that's used, it's problematic for these reasons. We'll only refer to it because it's like used, you know, describing a data set or from something we quote, but otherwise we use these other words. And in practice, like in the practice of being like a dietitian or whatever, so the organization ASDA, which we've mentioned a couple times, includes a lot of, I'm giving you the website, includes a lot of people in that field and a lot of fields. And so I think that's an important conversation to have, like, what are all of the ways that we could leverage our amazing expertise and insider knowledge as dietitians to mess with this system of weight hierarchy? You know, what are ways that can work for us? Because you got to take care of yourself and you can't sacrifice your whole life and your whole endeavor, and also try to spread some joy and justice to the people we work with. So it's a great question and a good challenge. I don't have all the answers. I think some other diet like you would probably have an answer, and Fresh, you probably have an answer, so I went on too long.
No, I was going to see if we could squeeze in more. I think that that's a great answer, and I don't have the best way of working them into that, but I do know, and that website is probably a great website too, like just tons of other folks doing this work who probably also have insight into that better than I do. But yeah.
man, I can't believe it. We're at time. I want to go through. I'm like, okay, we need to go out for dinner now, all of us.
I know. I kind of just want to answer all the questions somehow.
I know. Thank you so much for this important, amazing discussion. So glad that I was in the virtual room to hear it. And now I will turn the class back over to, I think I want to say, am I turning it over to Lily? I'm terrible. I'm sorry, Lily.
Hi, everybody. I'm here for just a minute. And
okay.
Thank you everybody so much for this discussion. And I just want to, hopefully this conversation has whet your appetite for more. We're going to continue discussing this next week, or continue discussing it from different angles next week. Our guest next week is Dr. Fatima Stanford, who's also going to talk about weight bias, and specifically going to hone in on the role of weight bias in health outcomes. And so she's going to talk about this. She's an MD, among many other letters and qualifications. And so it's going to be interesting to talk about these from a different angle. And Marilyn and Chef Fresh, I hope you join us. It would be great to have you to be part of that conversation. So same time next week, same place.